The big question, of course, is, well, if the first home buyers are coming back into the market, if we go back to the first lockdown of 2020, that's what happened back then. And then the investors jumped in pretty quickly and the whole thing took off like a rocket. So we've got to ask ourselves, if the first home buyers are stepping into the market now, are the investors following? Hello again, everybody. Last week I had a look at the data from my various monthly surveys, giving us insight into what the first home buyers are doing. And what I said was that we could see from the data, especially from my survey of real estate agents and the other one of mortgage advisors, that the first home buyers were stepping back into the market. I don't think there's any particular thing which is sort of driving them in there. It's probably just a combination of fewer fears that interest rates are going to go through the roof, the fact that prices on average are down by about 12%, and maybe just a bit of that pulling back from trying to pick the bottom of the cycle, given that frankly none of us have the ability to do that. The big question, of course, is, well, if the first home buyers are coming back into the market, if we go back to the first lockdown of 2020, that's what happened back then. And then the investors jumped in pretty quickly and the whole thing took off like a rocket. So we've got to ask ourselves, if the first home buyers are stepping into the market now, are the investors following? Well, I can look through each of my 5 surveys there and they all give me some insight into what the investors are doing. I'm prepared to say that as yet, not really. The investors are still not really moving into the auction rooms, into the open homes, but I do definitely think their interest has been peaked a little bit. I think they're starting to stick their heads out of their burrows, just keeping an eye on what is happening there in the market. And I think what they're going to be particularly paying attention to will be the monthly house price change data from REI and Z. If we see the extent of house price fall slowing down, and eventually one day we will, then I think maybe we'll see a bit of a move back in. But just to run through some of the numbers here, for instance, my monthly survey of mortgage advisors, remember I think I said that a net 47% of the advisors said they were seeing more first home buyers. I've still got a net 5% saying they're seeing fewer investors. Now the thing is, a month ago that reading was about minus 30%, and a few months ago it was about minus 62%, so definitely less weak than it was before. And the same thing goes when we look at the survey of real estate agents. I've still got about a net 30% saying they are seeing fewer investors in the market, but a few months earlier that was about minus 60, minus 68%. So again, definitely negative, but not as negative as was the case previously. And I've got indicators from my other surveys with Sharesies, with Crocker's property managers, for instance, and they're not quite as clear cut as what I get from the real estate agents and the advisors, but they are generally showing that the investors are still standing back from the market, but maybe a little bit of interest just starting to appear out there. So nothing major at this stage, and I think especially in light of the interest rate issues, the lack of interest expense deductibility for investors making purchases of anything but a new building, with the interest rate outlook still relatively flat, I would suggest, for the next 12 months, unless things really blow up worldwide in terms of inflation. We'll have to see what happens there. I still think that any following of the investors this time to the first home buyers is going to be of far smaller magnitude than what we saw coming out of that first lockdown back in the early part of 2020. All the best out there.